Well, welcome everyone. Thank you guys for being here. It's so good to see so many faces on the block today. And I'm really excited to welcome Abigail back to the block. She did this teaching for us last year. And because she is such a meek woman, she is willing to do it again after I had some technical difficulties and needed to hear this message again. But we can always benefit from hearing more about meekness. And so thank you, Abigail, for being here. We're really excited to chat with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, tell us, and we've got now, I'm so excited. We have at my last count, 68 new members in the writer's block. We've broken 100. So I'm so delighted, and this recording will go to all of our free members. So tell us, I think most of us here know you, but for everyone's benefit, we'd love to know more about you. Tell us about yourself, Abigail.
Thank you. So I have my bullet points, but it has to start with a born again child of God and a servant of Christ. That is the identity that I have first and foremost. And then second to that, I am Jim's wife for 27 and 2/3 hard fought years. I'll just say it. But we are together and he still makes me laugh. I still make him cry, but we're we're hanging in. No, he laughs
Somehow
at me.
that works. Yeah.
Yes. And I have two sons. We have two sons, Sam, who's 19, and Gabe is 17. So that's a bit of the identity. But when it comes to who is Abigail, she is a pusher, a striver, take the bull by the horns, persuader. And as I like to say, in the last decade, she's a woman who's been tamed, been being transformed by God's taming grace. And I call that grace meekness. And yeah, so another year meeker. If you saw this last year, there's more room for meekness. Another thing, and I apologize if this embarrasses you, Kara, but I only have one visual aid for today, and it is this.
What is
That's
that?
my toilet paper roll. Yes. It's got a couple. I did literally dig it out of the garbage can. I think it has like 4 sheets on it. I think Amy may have seen this too, but I have that because my other sort of key to who I am a hater, and what I hate is waste.
Mm.
I hate waste in all its forms, down to the little last couple sheets on the toilet paper roll. Time. People who know me, Rachel, saw me in London. I don't like to waste a minute. Although I just read Screw Tape Letters, and that whole lie that our time is our own, that's challenging me too. But I don't like to waste anything, experiences, money, pain. And I think part of that, as writers, I don't think any of us like to waste it. That's part of, I think for a lot of us, why we like to write is because we're transforming those experiences into something useful for others. So like you, I'm a lover of God's word and words. And the kind of words I like to write, I call them soul strengthening words. That's just the other thing about me. Strength is an attribute that I admire in people. And I don't mean just like huge muscles, although, that's cool too. But what I really like is soul strength. And what I mean by that is stability. Those people who, they go through the storms of life and their anchor holds, and there is still joy and there is still peace. So that's the kind of strength I'm talking about. They're patient, they're gentle, they're meek, in a word. So that's the other part about me. And then 2 other things that I wanted to share. One is that I am an SLP for pay. That's a speech language pathologist. So 3 days a week, I work outside the home. And that means as we say, I write in the cracks. And it's been we talk about pain points, like find the pain point for your audience and go there. And a pain point for me that I haven't like fully explored, but it's been there for 20 years, is that I haven't been able to sort of devote full-time efforts to whatever the ministry, the creative side of me. It's been on the side, the Bible studies, the book clubs, the ministry that I love to do. But, and Rachel and I actually talked about this, but it is such a consolation for me and an encouragement if you're in that group where you have a job that you maybe don't enjoy as much as you're writing, but you need to do that because God's called you to that. It's been such an encouragement for me to think of the Apostle Paul and how he was a tent maker, right? And at one point he said, I'm doing this so nobody can accuse me of peddling God's word for profit, which is not to say that there's not a place for selling our words too. But in my case, where God has me, that's been such an encouragement to say, gosh, I can work at this job, and that sort of funds the work that I love to do, the speaking and the writing and paying for the website and all these kind of things on the side. So be encouraged if you are also writing in the cracks. And then the last thing that I have to say is that I am dubbed by my sister the Meek Geek. That's like hashtag Meek Geek. So that's the last thing about me.
I love that summary. I think that's really good. I love you had so many good things to say in there. I loved what you said about not wasting. And I think that's how God is. Like, he is in the business of not wasting anything. And I think I love what you talked about, just like even as writers, we don't like to waste our experiences, right? We can bless others by sharing that. But then also I had another thought too about your the paradoxical nature of what you love. You
Mm.
love this idea of strength and soul strength, being rooted, being grounded in the storms of life. And yet it feels paradoxical to meekness, because I think meekness feels like meek and weak rhyme, right? So somehow in our mind, we've kind of become, maybe that's what people think. I know better because I've known you for a few years, but I think that there is that tension between meekness and weakness. That's kind of that paradox. And I know you have a fondness for those things, those two things that feel to contradictory in nature, but really need each other in a way, right? Because meekness is strength.
Exactly. You're reminding me of side note, but related. I'll talk about maybe a little more later, but God has just opened doors to be able to share that meekness message and lead book studies. And the last one I was at a week ago, Wednesday, gosh, I have my chapter here. And the question was, is it even possible? Oh, here it is. Yes, on page 96. Do you think it's possible to become meek without facing adversity? And to a person at that group, they all said, no, now that we understand it a little better, meekness really is only formed in the face of some sort of adversity, something you wouldn't have
Mhm.
chosen for yourself. So yes.
Yeah. Maybe how do you define meekness?
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. I'm going to default to Matthew Henry. He's the one who wrote the book before mine, which is the quest.
Just a few years before you.
Yeah, about 300 plus years ago. He wrote The Quest for Meekness and Quietness of Spirit. And it really was just on that verse in First Peter, like the unfading beauty of a meek or gentle, it might say, and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. So then he wrote, 200 pages on that one verse. But his definition is the easy and quiet submission of the soul to the will of God as he makes it known by his word and by providence. Simple way of explaining providence for this is just to say, like, the circumstances in your life. So that's the definition: the easy, quiet submission of the soul to the will of God as he makes it known by his word and circumstances,
Mm.
which includes all circumstances, even those that are
Mhm.
hard, right? Well, it says, every word in there I love. Easy.
Yeah.
I don't love it because it's easy, but I love the end picture. I love the thought of submitting to God's will, easy, with a quiet spirit, whatever comes. But the other, like, easy, quick definition, I'm a geek. I'll just say that. I'm a meat geek. I have not been classically educated, but I still love my Latin words here and there. So one of the Latin words that I've learned for writing this book is the one for meekness, and it's mansuetus, which means used to the hand. And that would be a word that they would have used like in the Bible times, in the Greek culture or the Roman culture, Latin. Um, for a animal, especially a horse or some kind of cattle that had been trained and was not wild anymore, that could be ridden or harnessed, and was useful. So
Mm,
the short way is to say used to the hand. So what is meekness? It's
yeah.
being used to God's hand. It's another simple definition some of you might have heard is strength under control, but I would prefer to say strength under the Holy Spirit's control.
That's a good
That help?
clarification and distinction. I
Right.
love that. I love that too, of use to the hand,
Mhm.
right? Because there is the hand of providence that is guiding our lives and our circumstances, and being surrendered. We we need that. That changes us into people of meekness. So let's turn that kind of conversation towards writing. Like I think this is kind of the topic. If I know you like I think I do, this was the topic that kind of got you writing. Is
Mm.
that true? And like, could you tell us a little of that journey
Yeah.
for you?
So I'm going to back up further if that's all right.
Sure.
I was writing, like I was trying to think in preparation for this. When did I start like knowing I liked writing more than the average girl? And I think it was when my grandmother got me I still have it. I know exactly where it is in the basement on a shelf, a cute little journal. And that was when I was 8. And I remember I loved to journal, and it had the lock and all that fun stuff and the key that I probably lost. Anyway, I have that journal. And then like I would journal on and off, but I know starting at 18 through the present, I've been like a daily journaler. So that's raise your hand if you are you guys journalers a few times?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Most of them, I think.
That's
Yeah.
good. Good, good. So that was a big has been, not was, it is still a big part of writing. But I think I wanted to share in here because not only are we writers, but we're encouragers. And just as I was reflecting, like when did I know I liked to really write? And it was when I was affirmed for writing.
Mm.
And the first time that I really remember that was in 5th grade at my new school. I won the young authors contest for Rachel, believe it or not, fiction. And the fiction was a humorous sort of, do you know that Flubber story?
It was
Anyone?
a Disney movie, wasn't it?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was. And so I think I wasn't totally original, but my story was about this adolescent girl who had a magical kind of gum. And if she chewed the gum, she could jump really high. And so as this girl loved to play basketball, it was her superpower. And somehow that won the Young Authors Contest and I got an award. And then you start thinking, oh, maybe there's something cool here about me and the way I could express that fun story. And then I remember just the power again of praise and of calling out the giftings you see in people. And I'm pretty sure it was junior year English lit with Mr. William Bond. And I remember like it was yesterday when he like called me over to his desk after class and he said, Abigail, you are a good writer because you could write this position paper from both sides and you could convince me either way. And I really don't know how you actually feel, but you're doing a great job pitching it both ways. And there's probably more to it, but that resonated. And then I did keep writing. I wrote for the high school newspaper and got a couple whatever awards I think on the piece again I was sort of the controversialist. I wrote a piece about like should kissing in the hallways be allowed in the high
Ooh,
school.
I bet that was
Yeah.
salacious.
Yes, it was. It's like so like it goes way back, but in terms of a book, actually I just want to pause there and say, so all of you listening, like know how much your words can impact the the younger writers around you, and you can just encourage them so much. Yeah, I actually, so to come full circle on that, and then I'll move this spring, homeschool group asked if I could be the judge of their entries for their own little writing contest. And there were probably like 15 entries, so it wasn't huge, but like I tried to take my own words here to you all to heart. And I just was really mindful to find the good in each of those pieces and to give that thoughtful feedback, because I remember how much, it meant to me.
Mm.
So yeah, I would say that was when it started, but then actually, Carrie is here. So I'm going to say this part because Carrie, I think in one of the early, it was last year for sure, but one of the early Tuesday teachings, I think you mentioned how writing is persuading. Like when we write, excuse me. Does this sound
Yes,
familiar,
that was
Carrie?
me. Yeah, that was me.
Okay, so you can say it better than I do, but that stuck with me, probably because I know I'm someone, no matter what I write, I know myself. I know I'm trying to persuade. Even I think you even said, like, even if it's fiction, you're trying to persuade people to be entertained, or is that right? Fill me in.
Yeah, basically the idea that whatever we're writing, we're trying to convince somebody to believe what we believe, whether
Right.
it's through fiction writing or writing a devotional or a Bible study. And the idea, I was a fifth grade teacher. We taught persuasive writing. That was like the fifth grade standard at that time. So that was a big push for me. And whether it was in their stories that they were writing or whether it was, something else, it was to convince somebody to do something or to have a call to action, which is what we all try to do in our writing.
Right. Thank you. So I remembered correctly.
Yay! I did a
Yay, you
good job in
convinced
my
me.
fifth grade teaching.
You
Right.
persuaded
No,
her, Carrie.
you did. Although I have to admit, it was kind of like just fuel to my fire because I already knew that, but then hearing it from you, I felt vindicated. And the other reason I feel vindicated is because, again, going back to the Apostle Paul, I told you how I found encouragement from him in terms of tent making and doing like a secular job to pay for the other ministry work or support himself. But he says in 2 Corinthians 5, he said, therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade others. So like he used that word. He was out there and open about the fact that he was trying to be persuasive. And I know that an area I need to grow, and I pray that I have been growing, but I know there's still so much room to grow. And this I get from Amy has helped me on this, our neighbor Amy, Simon, is that you have to see where the perceived need is from the people you're writing for before you plow right in with maybe you are sensitive or wise enough to say, gosh, there's an underlying root issue here that I really want to talk about. But unless you can get them to sort of just be interested in what they perceive as their own need, you're going to lose them. So I feel like to be able to tone down and make my persuasion more, you write all the things, right? True, good, and beautiful. I can say it's true, but then to take the time to make it beautiful and to find out where people feel a need before I go ahead and tell them your real need is meekness. And so that's been an area of ongoing growth, and I still know I need to grow more, but I'm not apologizing for wanting to persuade. I just know I need to do it in a winsome way. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's so true. And John Piper has a similar quote, like, if you don't believe enough in what you're saying, then I'm obviously butchering his quote. It's in the block. I recently did an article, a writing tip on it, but he was talking about, like, that's the whole purpose of what we're doing is we're working to persuade other people. And I think too, like, don't you think for the writer, the persuasion happens to us in the process, either sometimes before, and then we're sharing that process, and sometimes throughout, like you were sharing the story with your fifth grade teacher who was saying, I'm not sure, like I can believe you could go either direction on this argument. right? But that is part of the transformation that I believe happens inside of our own lives as we're writing, like we're figuring out what we believe and why we believe it.
100%.
Yeah.
Totally. I thought of two related thoughts, and one is just about Paul. Like I've heard this and I didn't go down the rabbit hole to figure it out, but I've heard it said like all of Paul's letters really are they're answers to arguments. Polemics, I think is that fancy word, where he was refuting a problem with what, Galatians has its own issues versus the Corinthians, their own sinful temptations. So, especially in the letter to Philemon, right? If we know that letter, he was unapologetic and very upfront about trying to persuade Philemon to release that slave Onesimus. He was
Mhm.
like all over why, like, you owe me your very life. And if he owes you anything, put it on my like he was pulling out, like
All
not
the
pulling out.
cards.
Yes, there we go. Persuade. And the other thing, I forgot one of my thoughts earlier about encouraging others. And I just wanted to say two more names of people who are really encouraging when I think of my writing kind of the trail. Because I do like persuading and I love the Bible and I love to share what I'm learning. I started writing these, I'm going to call them articles. Rachel might have been there, but I still have the email group was called Kind Readers. And they were, not that they all read it, but one of my kind readers, after a few of these articles, her name's Tracy, and she said, Abigail, you need your own blog. And so that's when I started the Joyfully Pressing On blogspot. That was just there. And then probably 2 or 3 years after that, a writer friend, a traditionally published writer friend, her name is Kathy. And I still remember it was actually across the room from where I am. And I still remember the article that I had published. And she goes, this is good. I want to be able to share this. Abigail, you need your own website. So it was these nudges that came from, like Tracy and then Kathy, that were just, we say speak life. That's really what it was. A timely word, right? Our words are nourishing. So let's use our
That's
words that way as my encouragement.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so encouraging too, because when we are encouraged, it does kind of motivate us to have eyes to see ways in which we can encourage others because we've benefited from that. And so you're like, wow, if I can help somebody else and give them a word like that, that we just don't know how far those words go. And
Right.
so that's great that you were able to take those nudges and move towards that direction. Um and so all of these things kind of coalesced for you. Like you started with your journal, moved on later in life to a blog, started learning about meekness, and then wrote your first book, Meek Not Weak. And so tell us, like, you're going to share with us more on Thursday about this, but what does meekness look like and how does it strengthen us as writers, both in writing and just as people in our own spiritual development?
Okay. That's this is the magic sauce. I'm just going to back up a tiny bit to say kind of the title for this thing, the leverage. By leverage, I was thoughtful about that word. If you can maximize where you put that fulcrum, if you think of this, the teeter-totter, the seesaw, and if you can there's a load and then there's the effort that you place. Like if the load is here and you press here, you get that kind of thing. If the fulcrum's closer to where the load is, you don't have to use as much effort to move it. So when I was thinking about like writing, like I'm connecting it back to this. I don't want to lose you. I'm really trying a hard trick right here to connect these things. So if meekness is this acceptance, actually welcoming this, receiving whatever God's will is as he reveals it through even hard circumstances. We know that there are hard circumstances in life, obviously, there are hard circumstances in the writing life. So if we have this mindset of meekness as sort of how we're leveraging, what we're doing is we're getting more bang for our buck. Instead of just seeing a struggle as a writing struggle, we can realize, oh my gosh, you know what? That challenge that I'm having with being patient to be published or to get good feedback, or goodness sakes, for the right people to read my work or just people to read my work. That's one example, that patience. That's actually something, instead of just keeping it sort of in the writing bucket, we can actually realize, gosh, how I receive that isn't just my writing life. That's also my soul. I can become more like Jesus. I can become more meek, which pleases God, makes me look more like Jesus by the way I receive these, I'm going to call them challenges in the writing life. So that can you give me a thumbs up, people, if that made sense? Or like iffy? I'm trying to connect that if we see our writing challenges as also things that can, the way we receive them can strengthen our souls. That's what I'm trying to have us do. Thursday, I'm going to talk real specifically about patience and self-control and submission, and my new favorite phrase, active contentment, with a nod from G.K. Chesterton. That I'll probably talk about Thursday, not today. I'll be self-controlled and not tell you today. But anyway, these are four.
She's persuading you to come on Thursday. It's a little
good.
carrot. I'm sorry.
Like I'll just tease it. I don't even think it's in my notes, but have you ever thought, just have you ever thought how the word content, how do you say that word? Go off mic. Or unmute is what I'm trying to say. content.
Content.
Ooh, or
Content or content.
there you go. And so I'm only partly being self-controlled. So G.K. Chesterton talked about how really those two different meanings, we see them as totally different meanings, content and content, but they're connected. So that's why I'm saying that there's a place for active contentment, and we'll talk about that. But when we see like life coming, it's both ways. So I was saying we might have a writing challenge, and if we can see that as, oh gosh, this isn't just about writing, how I receive this can actually make me more meek, period, which is to say more like Jesus, more filled with the fruit of the Spirit, that beatitude, right? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. When we can see these challenges in writing as also kind of making the more bang for the buck, growing our souls, because it's not just writing. It works that way, but I think it also works the other way, which I shared a little bit, is that when we have these challenges in life, many of us are like, oh, that is material. And so we are thinking, how can I repurpose that? What names can I change? Whose permission? And Rachel and I have had a lot of talks about that, and holding back on some of the most close things to our heart, because, we're still too vested with the people we love. So we can't write about that. And there's probably a whole nother, is there a Tuesday teaching or Thursday teaching on that, Kara? I feel like there've been
about respecting privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can dig through. We've talked, I think it was Mara Eller actually, who was talking about how we write from scars and not wounds, and giving time to heal in those areas. That comes to mind.
So that's the reciprocal. I mean, what happens in our writing life can grow our soul. What happens just in our other life can also strengthen our writing. And we will explore that more on Thursday.
It's all intertwined, right?
It is.
I mean, it's just, we like to separate our lives into different categories. But we are whole people, embodied people, body and soul, and all of these issues of life integrate. And I love how you are talking about leveraging, right? Like, not like, don't miss the lesson.
Don't waste it.
Don't waste it. That's so good. That's so good. I feel like I always learn from you when you talk about meekness, and am always encouraged
Can I,
to learn more about it. Go ahead.
awesome. No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I did have, just sort of to share because I know I can come across as, gosh, like, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer. I hope that's not how it's coming across. And I did want to just share, like, in the year and whatever, year and a half almost since I first shared, like, God has been so kind with opening doors. And so when we talk about God's will, as revealed by his word, but also by the providences of life, sometimes they are just blessed, happy providences. And I wanted to share that. Is that all right too? Because that
Yeah, of
might
course.
encourage some of the women. I think I would have been really encouraged 5 years ago to hear this, or 2 years ago. But my encouragement is to be faithful. And I think that, so because you were prompting me on that. Yeah. So the meekness book probably started like the idea 15 years ago when I led a ladies' Bible study on it. And then it just slowly, I would blog about it. And, then over time, it was like, okay, I think there's enough content here. If I can rework it and string it together more smoothly, it could be a book. And so that was just a call deep within me to finish that. I felt like that was faithfulness to God, and I did get a lot of encouragement from people around me, including some of you. But you don't know, this is my saying. Amy's heard me say it. I love this. It's, you do not know if it will grow, but you will not reap if you do not sow. I'm going to say that again. You do not know if it will grow, but you will not reap if you do not sow. And that was actually, I think, like a paraphrase of Phil Ryken when he was talking about Ecclesiastes 11, where it's saying, like, cast your bread on the waters. You don't know if it'll come back to you. Like, sow. You don't know. Don't make the excuse, like, because it said, if you regard the wind, you'll never sow. If you regard the clouds, you'll never reap. Like, there's always an excuse not to. So it's so important. Yes, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Thank you, Amy. So it's like, that's what it is. And then once it's out there, this is the new part of God's kind providence to me. There was a lot of work involved, right? We work out, Christ works in. I had a lot of helpers, but as you know, I think probably most of you have heard, it's like, it's effortful to get a book bound and out there. But then once it's out there, God can use it. And that's been my joy to see that happen. And I wanted to talk about this one Thursday. It was in November, and I had just gotten back from Stevens Point, about 3 hours north of here. The church I went to in college, I was able to speak to their women's retreat. And then when I got back that Monday morning, I opened my work email, which, like I should do, I say work, my writer's email account, which I don't open enough. And there were actually two opportunities. And one I had missed. They had already filled the spot because it was like a month old. And
Oh,
the other one, yeah, ouch, I apologized. And I've checked it a little more. And then one was like a 10-day-old email from a church about a half an hour from here. And the women's ministry director said, somebody I know read Meek Not Weak. They loved it. It's transforming their life. And I think I would love to have all the women in our church read this book. Could you come and teach us? I was like, no, oh my goodness. And do a retreat to kick it all off in January. So, I mean, you can guess I did. I was thrilled it happened. It was a lot of work. It was live streamed and all new PowerPoint. So anyway, this is a plug. If you're interested, I now have the whole kit and caboodle so that it could be done virtually with the slideshow. But anyway, God opened that door. And then that led to another, oh, I forgot. So that was the Monday morning. That was the email I opened. And then I am not kidding, an hour later, because it was still before noon, I just finished my run, and a cold call came. Heim, I don't even remember her first name, but she was from another sort of area church and asked if I could speak at their Christmas tea, a church I hadn't, been a part of before. So it was just like, that was just the kisses of God. And I just want to tell you, I didn't solicit those, either of those. And then that other one at the church led to a couple of other opportunities. One, I'm going back to this, it's a retirement center, but there's retired people and people from the local community have been coming in on Wednesday nights. So it's the whole, like, I sewed, I got the book out with God's help and a lot of human help, and now he can use it. And I hope that's encouraging for people to say, be faithful, whatever you're doing. You don't know how God can use it. That was a little bit of a detour, Kara. Can you weave it back in?
No, well, I appreciated the detour. I think it's really important because it's difficult. It's hard. It's hard work to finish a project like that. And I kind of think of, I taught a message last year on Philippians 2, talking about the sufferings of Christ, and then at the bit, and he emptied himself even to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God highly exalted him. And I talked about this parabolic curve, right? And there's like down, 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 suffering, 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 the apex of suffering, crucifixion, and then comes glory, right? And in so many ways, like what you're talking about is a similar journey, I'm sure. I mean, I'm kind of in the midst of the beginning of working on a book project, but just a lot of grind, right? A lot of suffering, a lot of difficulty, probably a lot of discouragement along the way. And then at some point in the future, you have this thing, and then God gives you the rewards. It's a sowing and reaping, definitely, but I think it's also a suffering and then even a little bit of glory, a little taste of it at least.
Yes.
Well,
Hallelujah.
I appreciate you sharing that for sure. I want to give people a opportunity to ask questions, but I had one more thing. I don't know if you have time for this one, Abigail. We talked about this beforehand. Maybe you can do. Maybe you can fit this in. I'm not sure, but tell us a little bit. I mean, why meekness matters just for Christians in general, because we're applying this in the writer life, but we're all here believers in Jesus Christ. There's a lot more going on in our lives than just our writing. And so, and whoever listens to this coming later in the future, maybe on the podcast, can you give us an argument for why all Christians need to care about meekness?
I can. And as I begin that argument, that persuasion, I want to thank my friend Rachel, because it was in this same room that I'm in about. So Rachel, we could find out exactly, because it was before you went to London, which was 6 years ago. So almost 6 years ago to the month, right? You were taking Elijah. So about 6 years ago in this room, I was talking to Rachel about this book that was still on my heart. She'd been hearing me talk about it on and off for 5 years by that point. And she said, Abigail, so why does meekness matter? Why? This is like a hard sell. Why are you going to tell people that they should read about meekness? And I appreciate that, right? We talk about iron sharpening iron, because that's the question I needed to hear. Like, I can have all these million ideas why it matters to me, but I'm not writing to me at this point. If it's a book, I'm writing to other readers. So that led me to really find out. And so I've narrowed it down to 5 reasons. So these are kind of like my top 5 for why meekness ought to. And I do use that word, like people have bad things to say about should and ought, but I don't apologize for those, because the Bible uses that language too, right? There are certain ways we should live, we ought to live. And I do feel, I do know that meekness is one of those ways if we're Christians. How do I know? Here's the first reason why meekness should matter. It should matter because meekness makes us look more like Jesus. And if we are Christians, Christian little Christ follower, and at the core of who Jesus said, like he self-identified, we have all this stuff about self-identifying. Jesus seldom did that. I mean, he used like metaphors for like, I am the light of the world. I am the resurrection. I am the good shepherd. But when he was using like the adjectives, they're not too many. But in Matthew 11, he did say, I am meek and lowly in heart, or humble and gentle, meek and lowly. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that Greek word, same, gentle, meek. But that's how Jesus self-identified. And if he's doing that and we're saying we want to be like Jesus and we have no clue what meekness is, we're missing something big in terms of what it means to look like Christ, to live like Christ. Yeah, the quote, Sinclair Ferguson, that Scottish pastor, he said that meekness is virtually the only personal quality about himself to which Jesus drew specific attention. So if he's calling it out, then it should matter to us. Reason number 2, like this is just like Jesus throughout the Bible. He gives a command and then he gives the blessing. He tells like what's in it for us. So that's the same with meekness. There are big blessings beside like the obvious one in Matthew 5:5 that the meek will inherit the earth. There are 3 that like these are huge for me. Tell me if they're huge for you. Fresh joy, abundant peace, and God's guidance. Like that's pretty much the best 3 that I would want. And those are promised specifically to the meek. Yeah, I can give you references later if you want, but Psalm 37:11, Isaiah 29:19, and Psalm 25:14. So specifically tied to the meek. Third reason, and I know this will resonate with you, like we all want to be useful to God, right? Am I right? We want to know that we're being used. And meekness is, remember what I said about being used to the hand? But like by definition, that's what it is. It's saying you're useful, you're trainable, you're controllable, you're following God's voice and his will. You're not like doing it your way. So you are more useful. And I love to tell the story about my grandpa Al, who he loved the reject ponies. Growing up, like he lived on a little hobby farm and they were probably free or would have gone off to the glue factory. So grandpa would take them in. And as kids, we'd drive up 45 minutes to Mukwonago, Wisconsin, and we'd pull in and grandpa had this old barn full of like saddles. He had little goat carts, like he had all the gear for horses and ponies. And he seldom had a pony that we could ride. So we would get there and we would get like so disappointed. There was this sway-backed horse that couldn't be ridden. And then there was this one named Jack. I'll get to my point. And Jack was so like, he looked so normal and like, yay, we can finally ride a horse at grandpa's. And we couldn't because he was wild. Grandpa would say, you can't even get near Jack. He'll kick you. So that's what we don't want to be. Meekness is the opposite. Meekness makes us usable to God. And then reason number 4 is that this is just short and sweet. In Colossians 3:12, Paul says, clothe yourselves with meekness. There you go. And then reason number 5.
Enough said.
Yeah, right. I rest there, but I won't. Number 5 is, to some, this is the most compelling reason. And I'll back into it because Matthew Henry, he said, it's in our trials that our meekness is more obvious, like to the world, than our love for God or our faith in God. So what he's saying is like, when we're going through something hard, if we're meek, that catches people's eyes. They can't tell if we love God. They can't necessarily tell our faith, but when they see how we're living, if we respond without lashing out, without self-pity, those are kind of the 2 big ones, self-pity or lashing out, that is eye-catching. That does draw attention. They're like, wow, you were treated unfairly and you're not pitching a fit about it? Whoa. So the reason, number 5, is because the world is watching and it needs to see Jesus. And when we live like him in that way, it really does, especially I feel like more and more the way our world is, like all about my rights and my have it your way. It's just makes the contrast even bigger between the world and the meek people who say, hey, I trust God. I trust he's using this. He's good. He's still in control. There you are.
That's beautiful. I love that list. It's a good list. And it does,
Thank you, Rachel.
it does stand out in people's lives. When you see that, you're like, that's something different. I don't see that every day. Tell us what you're going to talk to us about on Thursday.
I am very excited because this is repackaged. So if you were around a year and a half ago, it's pretty new. But I'm going to specifically talk about, just because I love this strength training part. And I think these principles of what makes for successful. So this is like physical strength training. There's 3 principles that I think generalize also to our writing lives. So they can make us stronger. You want to look more tone? That'll work for that. But it will also work for just the longevity of being a strong writer. So I'll start with those 3. But then the main part of the talk is going to be really looking at these 4, I'm going to call them meek mindsets that we can leverage to strengthen our souls, meaning making us more meek, but also to strengthen our writing. So I'll really tune in on how does patience fit into our writing life? How does self-control? Why do we need self-control in our writing life? Why do we need to have submission? How does submission work with the writing life? And then the 4th one is what I already teased a little bit, that active contentment. So that's what we'll talk about.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm so excited. I think that'll be really immensely practical and helpful. Well, thanks, Abigail. Let me just invite you, if you're on this call, to unmute. Feel free to make comments or ask questions. Yeah, Carrie says, I feel like I just went to church. Preach.
That was good.
Thank you. Praise the Lord. I will say this is my other special news. Kara knows this, but I thought it was going to be this fall, but starting in February, I am going to take some seminary Greek. So I'm kind of excited about that.
That is so exciting. You're going to have even more word illustrations for the future. Are you all familiar with meekness? Is this clarifying to anyone on this call about what meekness is and looks like?
Or just any unrelated questions or loosely related questions?
Yeah, as you were talking, Abby, I think something that struck me a little bit new was I think it's actually harder to be meek when things, you were talking about that little bit of glory and a little bit of like blessing payoff, like you did all the struggle and the work, and God has been kind. And I don't know if I'm the only one, but that's where I struggle more in terms of being like Christ than in the suffering. Because in the suffering, there's not really a choice. It's and you're at the end of yourself. So you've already come to the end of yourself. You can't, you just see your limitations. And when it's going well, I think there's a tendency to not see your limitations and to it's easier just to go down the road of pride and not meekness. So, and honestly, I can't remember, I need to reread your book, but I can't remember if you talk about that specific, like when things are going well.
No.
Pride cometh before the fall. Like when things are going well, that's when we are in danger of most things, obviously.
Right. And actually, so I want to be clear here. I appreciate that. And I appreciate what Kara said, but I am going back to what that question I pulled out of here. Like meekness is, I do believe, is forged and formed and expressed when there's some sort of adversity. So those moments I wouldn't call meekness. Humility for sure, which could be a whole nother book. And actually, so I'll make that side note. Is anybody curious about the difference between meekness, gentleness, and humility? Like hand raise, anyone? No, but Amy, thanks for nodding. Because Amy's nodding, you're gonna have to sit through this. No, because they really are, they're overlapping, but just because Rachel and Kara mentioned that, that's different. Like I say, you can be humble when you are like, think of one of my new heroes of track racing is Sydney McLaughlin, LeBron. Like what a humble soul, right? So she was the gold medal winner for the 400 hurdles, and just what a humble soul, like thanking God, still giving him the glory and thanking other people around her. I wouldn't say that was meek. Um, and then so humbleness is knowing who you are under God. You are under God, but you can be humble when life is great. When the sun is shining down on you. And gentleness is more that just that tenderness, which a mother can have for her baby. You can use a tender voice, and you don't have to be having any kind of adversity to be gentle. So if you are meek, you will be humble and you will be gentle, but meekness, I think, is that specific subset of humility and gentleness when you have some kind of provocation in your life. Does that make sense, Rachel and Kara?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to distinguish that.
Yeah.
Hi, Abigail.
Hi.
The way I understand it, and tell me if this is what your research has shown, is that pride is to humility what anger is to meekness.
Give me a minute. Pride and humility I see as opposites. Anger and meekness. Yes, I would agree.
Yes,
Absolutely.
but that's how, yeah, that's how I think of it, because like you said, you can be very humble while you're still really upset. Something that is unjust or something that shouldn't have happened or whatever. You could be like, yes, I deserve this. I know, but I'm still mad about it. It's the not acting out of anger, but rather saying, nope, I'm going to let the anger go. Let the Lord be my avenger. I'm not going to be angry. I'm going to kind of let that go. And I remember reading about the levels of meekness, that just not showing anger isn't necessarily being fully meek. You could be really angry on the inside, and it's just because you don't show it and you smile doesn't mean you're really meek. And I think that's kind of what your book delves into.
Yes, thank you. You're reminding me of that. Like, I know Elizabeth Elliot talked about that whole story of, but I'm standing up on the inside, to the little guy who's like strapped in his car seat. Thanks for sitting, but I'm Yeah. And also I know I do address it in this book, because I think definitely it's that outward lashing out of anger, but it's also that inward seething and that self-pity that is equally an opposite of meekness. Does that make sense? So meekness, the opposites are self-pity, but also anger. They're both.
Yeah, and self-pity and anger, those are different ends of the spectrum of your reactions, right? So you can be angry and red-faced, but you can also just be as equally unmeek by just having a pity party, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's a good thing. Like there's a spectrum of opposites.
Like I think of, because I just was reteaching the section on Moses, and when God told him no about entering the promised land, he did not throw a pity party. He blessed Joshua. He passed on the baton. He, as far as we can tell, he worked hard until the day he died up on the mountain. He didn't go into this, well, God let me down after 40 years of serving him, I'm so done. No, he didn't do that. That I'm so done thing is not meek, just so you know.
One of the things that really struck me, just laced through everything you were saying, and it's probably because it's what God's already talking to me about, was just the whole, how meekness is so interconnected with having a deep internal understanding or reverence for God's sovereignty. That, that all things, all things from his hand, and having that sense of, I was struck with something that I struggle with in response to maybe ongoing suffering, or suffering that keeps rearing its head just when you think that it's done. Is that sense of, like, my knee jerk is to protect myself. And, that's my knee jerk, is like, uh-oh, we're going down this road. I've had enough pains, I don't want pain to define my life again. and getting that mindset where you start to do this as opposed to, Lord, you know, you are sovereign, you knew then and you know now, and you are truly working all things good, you know, and I can trust your overarching plan. And that was really where it was just like, I just felt like that was laced through everything you were saying, is that this is that deeply rooted sense of you are good, you are sovereign, you know the end, and I can take all of this angst that's building up inside of me and all this fear and lay it in your lap, you know, and know that you are sovereign, you are good, you have a beautiful end to this, you know. So that just kind of, I wrote down for myself, for my own use, seeing his beautiful hand, his sovereignty in the whole of our lives.
Mhm.
But that's what meekness, what you were saying, that's what it meant to me and how it impacts me.
Beautiful summary. Yes. And you, I would like to send you a book. I feel like there's a whole chapter called Meekness Rests on Providence. And there's a little difference between providence and sovereignty. The simple way I explain that is providence is sovereignty meaning God's in control, but providence meaning he is the Father lovingly in control. It's like that added layer. But exactly to what you said, I found it on page 65. It is so close. This how we receive God's sovereignty. Jerry Bridges, I don't know if you've heard of him. Jerry Bridges described meekness simply as just what you said, Stacy. Here it is: an enlightened awareness of the sovereignty of God. So exactly, you were listening. Good job.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Abigail, thank you so much for doing 2.0 with us. This has been really good. I think maybe we need a 3.0 next year. So just be ready for that. I'm gonna knock on your door next year. But and then I hope everyone will come and join us again on Thursday as we learn to leverage this meekness in our writing lives. So I'm really looking forward to that teaching as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Have a great afternoon. Replay up soon.
Thank you.